What if one of the most profound images used by Jesus to talk about the kingdom of God was not that of a throne, an army, or a great manifestation in heaven, but that of a seed hidden beneath the earth, a seed that no one can hear growing, a seed that disappears into darkness before turning into life? Perhaps there is something in this image that almost always goes unnoticed. Because when we think about the kingdom of God, our imagination tends to look for what is great, visible, and extraordinary. We hope for clear signs. We expect immediate changes. We hope to feel something powerful happening. We hope to perceive God so clearly that no doubt is possible. But Jesus often pointed in another direction. He talked about seeds, of yeast hidden in the dough, of hidden treasures, of small things that start almost invisible and slowly transform everything around them. And there is a particularly intriguing parable recorded in the Gospel of Mark. In it, Jesus compares the kingdom of God to a man who sows seeds on the earth. After that, he sleeps, wakes up, goes through nights and days, while the seed germinates and grows. And then a surprising expression appears. The man doesn't know how that happens. This little sentence completely changes the picture, because it means that there is growth that does not depend on our ability to observe it. There is a process that continues even when we cannot explain it. There is a transformation that may be happening before any fruit is visible. And it is precisely here that the central question arises. Was Jesus only teaching about the future kingdom of God? Or could this image also reveal something about the spiritual transformation that begins silently in human beings? The traditional Christian interpretation of the parable has its own richness and does not need to be discarded to ask this question. Over the centuries, Christians have understood the kingdom as the sovereign action of God, inaugurated in the mission of Jesus and destined for its fullness. But when we place this parable alongside other images used by Christ and then observe how certain ancient texts linked to Gnostic spirituality spoke of inner knowledge, a fascinating contemplative possibility appears. Not as a secret historical truth that would have been hidden for centuries, not as a doctrine that all traditions should accept, but as a symbolic reading. Perhaps the seed is also a way of understanding what happens when a word from God finds space inside a person. Because a seed doesn't make a sound when it breaks its own shell. The earth does not announce the moment when the first root appears. No crowd gathers to watch the moment when, beneath the ground, what seemed immobile begins to transform. And yet, life began. Perhaps this is exactly why so many people believe that nothing is happening spiritually within them. They look for leaves before roots. They look for fruits before germination. They look for answers before transformation. They seek to feel God intensely, when perhaps the first movement is as silent as a seed opening in the darkness. In Mark 4, Jesus presents several images related to the seed. First comes the well-known parable of the sower, in which different types of soil represent different ways of receiving the word. Then comes that little parable about the mysterious growth of the seed. And then the image of the mustard seed appears, something small that becomes much larger. This sequence is important. We are living in days when prophecies are being fulfilled before our eyes, but the majority still walk in darkness, trapped in incomplete truths that have been carefully hidden from humanity over the centuries. Now think, what if precisely what was taken from the scriptures contained answers that you have been looking for years? Answers that can illuminate your path, strengthen your faith, and reveal the true purpose of Jesus' coming. Therefore, I prepared this powerful digital book for you. Censored Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed. This book is not just a read, it is a spiritual awakening, a tool made for those who want to go beyond the surface, free themselves from manipulation and reconnect with the authentic Christ, without filters, without distortions, and without human interests. By purchasing this material, you not only access a hidden truth, but you also directly support my work and the continuation of this independent research, allowing this message to continue reaching more people. Download right now. The link is available in the first pinned comment. But be careful. As it contains spiritually sensitive information, this material can be removed from the air at any time. Laney moment. Ensure your access while the link is still active. If you are ready for this awakening, come back here and write, Amen. That will be your leap of faith, and today, God can open a door you never knew was about to open. Because the kingdom does not initially appear as something ready-made. It appears as something received, then like something that grows, and finally as something that manifests itself. Receive, grow, manifest. Perhaps this movement explains much more about spiritual life than we imagine. There are times when a person hears a sentence from Jesus and apparently nothing happens. She continues working, facing her worries, dealing with her doubts and living her routine. Maybe weeks later that phrase will come back to mind during a difficult decision. Maybe months later she will realize that she has started to react differently to someone who hurt her. What seemed like just a sentence began to take root. Nobody saw it. Perhaps not even the person himself noticed, but something changed. This is how a seed works. It starts where the eyes can't reach, and this leads us to an essential characteristic of the image chosen by Jesus. Before growing upwards, the plant needs to grow downwards. Before that which will be seen, there is that which will remain hidden. Before the branches, there are roots. Before the fruits, there is depth. Perhaps you have never looked at this parable this way. We usually judge our spiritual growth by what we can show, how much we know, how much we can explain, how many practices we perform, how many answers we find. But the language of the seed suggests another criterion. Perhaps some of the most important transformations are precisely those that no one can see. When you fail to respond immediately with anger, when you begin to notice pride before it controls your words, when you feel like judging someone but decide to understand, when an old guilt slowly stops defining your identity, when you start wanting the truth more than you want to feel right. None of this needs to produce a spectacle, but it can produce roots. And there is something even deeper in this parable. According to Mark 4:26-29, the man sows the seed and then continues his life. He sleeps and gets up, night after night, day after day. The earth produces gradually. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book, Censured Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention. Stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. First the sprout appears, then the cob, then the grain matured. Jesus describes a process, not an instant. This distinction is fundamental, because one of the greatest spiritual frustrations arises when we transform what is a process into an immediate requirement. We want to understand today what may need to mature over the years. We want to completely forgive in an instant what we are still learning to surrender. We want to possess faith without doubt when perhaps our own doubt is forcing us to abandon superficial answers. We want to have peace before learning to remain silent in the face of what we cannot control. The seed, however, is not condemned because it is not yet a tree. She simply goes through her process. There is a deeply human wisdom in this image. The beginning doesn't have to look like the end result. Perhaps you are looking at an incomplete part of your own journey and interpreting incompleteness as failure. But they are not the same thing. A root is not an incomplete fruit. It is a necessary step. A sapling is not a failed tree. It's life in development. And maybe some things you think are too small are precisely the most honest signs that a change has begun. A question you never asked, a new need for silence, an unexpected compassion, less resistance to forgiveness, a desire to understand Jesus' words more deeply, a clearer perception of one's own contradictions. At first glance, none of this seems extraordinary, but seeds don't look extraordinary either, until they start to grow. This perspective becomes even more interesting when we look at another parable of Jesus, recorded in Matthew 13:33 and Luke 13:20-21. Jesus compares the kingdom of God to the yeast that a woman mixes with flour until the entire dough is transformed. Once again, the image chosen is not that of a noisy transformation. The yeast disappears. Once mixed, you can barely visually separate it from the dough. But your presence begins to produce change. Think about it. Jesus could have chosen only symbols of political or religious power that were easily recognizable by his listeners. Instead, he also chooses something everyday, domestic, and seemingly insignificant. A small amount, hidden within a much larger mass. This allows us to formulate an important reflection. Perhaps the kingdom, before transforming what is around us, needs to transform the way we see what is before us. Because you can change places without changing internally. You can change environments and carry the same wounds. You can change communities and continue with the same resentments. He can accumulate religious knowledge and remain dominated by the same pride. You can learn new spiritual words without allowing any of them to deeply affect your way of living. Yeast suggests something different. It doesn't just stay on the surface, it penetrates the mass. Perhaps this is why authentic spirituality cannot be measured solely by the vocabulary we use. The question is not just what you know about God. The question is what you believe about God is doing to you. Is it making you more compassionate, more true, more aware of your own limitations, better able to hear, more willing to forgive, less dependent on the approval of others, more responsible for your own choices? If nothing changes, perhaps the knowledge is still on the surface. But when a truth really enters us, it begins to touch areas that we would prefer to keep intact. And that's not always comfortable. A seed needs to break its shell. The yeast alters the dough. The light reveals what was hidden. Maybe growing spiritually doesn't just mean feeling comforted. Sometimes it means noticing in ourselves what we were previously able to ignore. It is at this point that a Gnostic reading can add an interesting symbolic layer. It is important to make a distinction. When we use the word Gnostic, we are talking about a diverse set of ancient movements and texts, especially associated with the first centuries of the Christian era. There simply did not exist a single Gnostic church with a uniform doctrine. The texts normally grouped under this name have important differences between them. Many of them value gnosis, a form of spiritual knowledge or inner recognition related to the origin, condition, and destiny of the soul. This does not mean that the canonical Gospels teach exactly the same system as these texts. It would be historically incorrect to mix all these traditions together as if they were identical. But we can compare them. And when we do that, certain images start to dialogue in an interesting way. One of the best-known texts associated with this universe is the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus that are not part of the traditional Christian canon. Its dating and its relationship with other Christian traditions continue to be discussed among scholars. In one of his best-known sayings, the kingdom is presented in a way that emphasizes proximity and discovery, being described as something related to both the inside and the outside. This language became important for many later spiritual readings. But we need to be careful. It does not simply mean that you are God, or that all Christian doctrine about the kingdom can be reduced to an inner psychological state. This would be a much greater conclusion than the text allows us to say with certainty. What we can say is that certain ancient traditions placed a strong emphasis on spiritual recognition. Transformation would not be just waiting for something to happen outside. It would also be learning to understand. And here the seed appears before us again. Because a seed can be present without being recognized, it can be alive underground while someone looks at the field and believes that nothing exists there. Perhaps one of the most difficult spiritual questions is precisely this. How many important things are there in our lives that we have not yet learned to recognize? Perhaps you constantly ask God for a sign, while ignoring a silent change that has already begun in your way of thinking. Maybe it asks for an extraordinary answer, but the answer is coming as lucidity. Maybe you wait for a door to open, when what's changing first is your ability to decide which door is actually worth walking through. Maybe you want a situation to go away, but you're developing the courage to face it differently. This does not mean that every psychological change is automatically a divine action, nor does it mean that any inner feeling should be interpreted as revelation. Discernment remains necessary, but there is a possibility that deserves contemplation. Perhaps God's presence is not always recognized by the mind, intensity of an experience. Perhaps many times it is recognized by its fruits. Jesus uses this logic in other contexts. In Matthew 7, when talking about discernment, the image of knowing the tree by its fruit appears. Fruit takes time. And perhaps this offers us a much safer criterion than simply chasing sensations. If a spiritual experience produces arrogance, contempt for others, and a sense of superiority, we must question it. If someone believes they have found a truth that makes them unable to listen, unable to admit mistakes, and unable to love those who think differently, perhaps something has been lost along the way. Because spiritual growth should not turn the ego into a throne, it should make the heart more aware of its responsibility. The seed of the kingdom in this reading does not grow to make us superior. It grows to make us different from who we were. And there is a huge difference between these two things. Superiority needs to compare, not transformation. Those who need to feel spiritually superior ask, "Who am I above?" Those seeking transformation ask, "Am I becoming more truthful?" This second question is much quieter, and perhaps much more difficult, because it doesn't allow us to use other people's mistakes to escape ourselves. It's easy to see the lack of compassion in the world. It's harder to realize when our own impatience hurts someone. It is easy to condemn religious pride. It's harder to realize when we start to take pride in believing that we are more enlightened than religious people. It's easy to talk about conscience. More difficult is to become aware of your own shadows. Perhaps it is at this point that the symbol of the earth takes on another meaning. The seed does not grow in the air. She enters the earth. In biblical language, the earth has many symbolic layers. The human being himself in Genesis is presented in relation to the dust of the earth. In the parable of the sower, different soils represent different ways of receiving the word. The earth, therefore, can be contemplated as that which receives in us. But not all soil is prepared the same way. Jesus speaks of the hardened way, from the stony ground, from the thorns, and from the good land. The word is out. The problem is not necessarily in the seed. It's also in the way it is received. This leads us to an uncomfortable question. What makes our insides hardened? Maybe it's experiences that taught us to distrust everything. Maybe it's the constant need to be right. Maybe it's a guilt so old that we can no longer imagine a life without it. Maybe it's the rush. Maybe it's the excess noise. Maybe it's the fear of looking honestly at ourselves. A hardened earth does not have to be a bad person. Sometimes it's just a person who has learned to survive by closing themselves off. And there is a huge difference between condemning this closure and understanding it. Perhaps this is why spiritual transformation requires patience. Not every inner defense disappears when we hear a good explanation. Some were built over years. Some were born from losses. Others were born from disappointments. Others came about because we trusted someone and were hurt. Therefore, when we say that the kingdom grows silently, we are not advocating empty passivity. We are recognizing that some profound transformations cannot be forced. You can prepare the land. You can remove stones. You can water. It can protect what is being born. But you can't pull a plant to make it grow faster. If you try, you will destroy it. How often do we do exactly this to ourselves? We require a maturity that we are still building. We demand complete answers. We demand that all doubt disappear. We demand that the past stops hurting immediately. We demand that our prayer produce a certain sensation. And when this doesn't happen, we conclude that God is distant. But maybe distance and silence are not the same thing. This distinction can completely change the way someone goes through a spiritually dry phase. Silence seems empty because our senses do not find what they are looking for. But a seed would also experience the earth as darkness if it could describe it. She is buried. Don't see the sky. It does not yet know the shape of its future branches. You don't know how many leaves it will have. You don't see the fruits. Everything around seems dark, and yet that is exactly where germination begins. This is just a spiritual metaphor, not a formula for interpreting all suffering as necessary or desired by God. There are pains that need help, care, justice, and concrete action. But as a symbol, the seed allows us to ask whether certain periods of silence may contain processes that we cannot yet see. Maybe you have already experienced this. A time that felt spiritually empty. You prayed, but you didn't feel the same intensity. I read a passage, and it seemed to produce nothing. The answers that previously seemed sufficient no longer were. Maybe he thought he was losing faith. But sometime later, he noticed something unexpected. His faith hadn't just disappeared. She was changing shape. Some superficial certainties have died. Some questions got deeper. Some images of God needed to be revised. And what seemed like just loss became space for a more mature understanding. The seed has another surprising characteristic. To germinate, it stops remaining exactly as it was. This does not mean destruction in the negative sense, it means transformation. The previous form can no longer contain the life that is emerging. Maybe some spiritual phases work like this. You don't necessarily lose God. Maybe you lose a limited way of imagining it. You don't necessarily lose faith. Perhaps you will leave behind a faith that depended exclusively on easy answers. It does not necessarily abandon what Jesus taught. Perhaps you will finally begin to understand the depth of words that previously seemed simple. Consider, for example, the expression, "Kingdom of God." For many first-century listeners of Jesus, kingdom language carried intense expectations related to divine action, Israel's history, justice, and hope. It was not simply an expression about inner well-being. Reducing the kingdom to a private sensation would impoverish the context. Jesus speaks of justice, mercy, fidelity, forgiveness, care, and profound inversions of values. The kingdom has personal and community implications. Therefore, when we talk about a kingdom that grows within, we need to avoid a trap. The inside cannot become an excuse to ignore the outside. If something truly grows within us sooner or later, it shows up in the way we treat other people. The root is invisible, not the fruit. Perhaps it is this balance that makes the image so powerful. The beginning can be secret. The result does not remain completely secret. If compassion grows, someone will be treated with more compassion. If forgiveness grows, some relationship may be seen in a different way, even if reconciliation is not always possible or safe. If humility grows, our conversations change. If the truth grows, certain masks become difficult to sustain. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book Censured Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. If courage grows, decisions previously postponed begin to be faced. The kingdom, therefore, would not just be an experience that we feel. It would be a reality that begins to reorganize our choices. This is where we can understand why Jesus used so many parables. A parable does not just deliver a definition. She creates an image that continues to work within whoever listens to her. You can forget about an abstract explanation, but it's hard to forget a seed. It's hard to forget a man walking through a field while something grows without him knowing how. It's hard to forget a small grain becoming something bigger. Images enter memory, and then they mature. Perhaps the parables themselves are seeds. Jesus threw them among the people. Some fell on resistant ground. Others were received with momentary enthusiasm. Others were suffocated, and some continued to grow for years. Imagine someone who heard Jesus talk about the prodigal son. Maybe at that moment I only understood part of it. Years later, after making mistakes, losing, forgiving, or needing to be forgiven, the same story could take on a completely different meaning. The parable has not changed. The person has changed. And when a person changes, certain words seem to open doors that were previously invisible. This is why profound spiritual texts often look different at different stages of life. You read it when you're 20, and you realize something. Read at 40 and understand something else. Not necessarily because the text has unlimited meanings, but because you are no longer the same person who previously encountered it. New experiences created new questions, and new questions allow us to see details that previously didn't seem important. Perhaps this is exactly what it means to allow a word to take root. It's not decorating, it's living with it. It's letting her question you. It's coming back to it after life has changed. It's discovering that a seemingly small phrase can accompany someone for decades. Now notice something even more, it's intriguing. In the parable of the growth of the seed, there is night and there is day. The farmer sleeps and wakes up. The process goes through both. This means that the seed does not only grow when there is visible light, it also grows at night. As a spiritual image, this is extraordinary because we all have inner days, moments of clarity, moments when we understand, moments when we feel hope, moments when a passage seems to speak directly to us. But there are also nights, confusion, doubt, tiredness, silence, moments when we don't know where we are going. And the parable suggests that the process does not need to stop because night has arrived. You may not need to understand each step to get through it. This is not an invitation to abandon reason. On the contrary, it is an invitation to recognize the limits of our perception. There are human processes that we understand only by looking back. While we are inside them, they seem fragmented. Years later, we noticed connections. A conversation led to a question. The question led to a search. The search led to a decision. The decision changed a relationship. The relationship became a priority. And when we finally look back, we see a tree where before we only saw disconnected events. Perhaps part of spirituality is learning to respect what is still germinating, without calling something that has not yet matured a failure, without calling abandonment what may be silence, without calling absence what our eyes simply cannot yet recognize. But there is a second part of this reflection. Not everything that grows within us comes from the kingdom. Jesus also talks about thorns. It talks about worries that suffocate. It speaks of desires that deviate. Talk about toughness. This means that interiority in itself is not synonymous with truth. Looking within does not automatically mean finding God. We may encounter fear, resentment, vanity, self-deception, distorted memories, contradictory desires. Therefore, a mature spirituality does not romanticize everything we feel. She watches. Discerning is different from simply obeying any inner impulse. And here perhaps lies one of the most important contributions of the idea of gnosis, when understood carefully. Knowing is not just accumulating information. In many ancient philosophical and religious traditions, knowing deeply also meant being transformed by knowledge. You didn't truly know a reality just because you could describe it. Life needed to be touched by what had been recognized. This idea finds an interesting echo in several Christian passages, although we should not confuse different systems. Jesus often shifts attention from appearance to intention, from display to sincerity, from the outside to what happens in the heart. In the Sermon on the Mount, for example, practices such as prayer, fasting, and charity are presented with a clear concern. They should not simply become performances intended to receive human recognition. In Matthew 6, Jesus speaks repeatedly of the Father who sees in secret. This expression is deeply significant for our topic. The secret, what no one applauds, what no one publishes, what no one sees. Perhaps there is a spirituality that can only survive when there is an audience, and perhaps there is another that begins just when the audience disappears. Who are you when no one is looking? How do you talk about someone when they are not present? What do you do with an opportunity for revenge when no one would know? How do you treat someone who can't offer anything in return? What kind of thoughts do you entertain when you don't need to protect your image? These questions take us to secret terrain, and perhaps that is where the roots are formed. The outside can be managed for a while. We can build reputations, we can learn behaviors, we can use correct words. But there is an interior region where there is no public, and Jesus seems to attribute enormous importance to this region. That doesn't mean the outside doesn't matter. It means that the outside without the inside can become empty. An artificial tree may look perfect from afar, but it has no roots. It doesn't grow, does not produce fruit, does not cross stations. Perhaps this is why true transformation often seems slow. Because she's not just painting leaves, it's forming roots. And roots take time. Now think about what happens when we try to artificially speed up this process. We begin to represent what we have not yet become. We say we forgive because we believe we should have forgiven, but inside we continue to feed the same wound. We say we trust God because we are afraid to admit our doubts. We say we are at peace because we don't want to appear spiritually weak. But the seed doesn't need to pretend to be a tree. Maybe you don't need it either. There is a difference between remaining complacent and honestly acknowledging where we are. Spiritual honesty does not say, I am perfect. She says, I'm seeing more clearly where I still need to grow. And that could be a sign of maturity. Sometimes the more a person grows, the less impressed they are with themselves. Because you start to see layers that you didn't notice before. Begin to recognize mixed motivations. You realize that you can do something apparently generous and at the same time desire recognition. Realize that you can defend a truth and still do it with pride. You realize that you can love someone and still carry resentment. This awareness need not produce despair. It can produce humility. And humility is perhaps one of the most fertile lands for growth, because those who believe they already have all the answers are unlikely to continue searching. Those who believe they already see everything hardly ask where they could be wrong. Those who believe they are spiritually superior turn knowledge into a wall. But those who recognize that they are still learning keep the ground open. There is an ancient human temptation to transform spiritual experiences into an identity of superiority. I discovered something that others didn't discover. I woke up and the others are still sleeping. I know the secret. This language may seem profound, but it often feeds the very thing that true transformation should question: the ego. If there is a healthy Gnostic reading of the idea of inner knowledge, it should not end in the arrogance of those who believe they have a secret password to the universe. It should end in liability. If you see more, you are called to love more. If you understand more, you should judge less hastily. If you notice your own shadows, you become more careful when faced with the shadows of others. If you believe that there is divine light acting in humanity, you should not treat other people as disposable. Perhaps the true test of a spiritual experience is not how mysterious it seems. Maybe it's the type of person she's forming. This question protects us from many illusions, because intense experiences pass. Emotions change. Sensations can be interpreted in many ways, but character is built over time, just like a tree. This is why silence plays such a curious role in this reflection. Silence does not simply mean the absence of sound. There is an outer silence, and there is an inner silence. You can be in a completely silent place while your mind continues to be full of imaginary discussions, worries, and memories. And you can be in a noisy city while there is a small space of attention inside you. When we talk about spiritual silence, we are mainly talking about this ability to not react immediately to everything, to observe before responding, of allowing a word to remain with us before turning it into an opinion, to listen before preparing a defense. Maybe some seeds die because we never give them enough silence to take root. We hear something and immediately look for something else. We read a passage and seconds later we are consuming new information. A question starts to arise and we quickly drown it out with distraction. We live surrounded by answers and, paradoxically, we can lose the ability to remain faced with a true question. Jesus often retreated to solitary places to pray, according to the Gospels. We don't need to turn this into a secret technique. The text itself is significant enough. There are moments of crowds, and there are moments of reflection. There are times to talk, and there are moments of silence. There are moments to teach, and there are times to remain before the Father. Perhaps our spiritual life also needs this rhythm, because what we receive in the midst of movement needs some space to be assimilated. Think of a simple phrase attributed to Jesus in the Gospel of John: "Abide in me." The image that accompanies this language is the vine and the branches in John 15. Once again, Jesus uses organic growth, not a machine, not an instant build. A vine, branches, fruits, permanence. The word remain has a special force. Staying means not running away immediately. Do not abandon the process because it has become slow. Don't constantly change paths in search of a more intense sensation. There are things that can only be known through permanence. You don't get to know a friendship deeply in a single meeting. You don't know a person through a conversation. You don't know yourself through an afternoon of reflection. And perhaps it is no different with spiritual life. The seed needs to remain in the ground. The branch must remain on the vine. The yeast needs to remain in the dough. Notice how these images point to continuity. Maybe our culture is training our attention the opposite. We want newness. We want intensity. We want quick results. We want one revelation after another. But Jesus talks about remaining, and staying can seem a lot less exciting than discovering a secret. But perhaps the real mystery lies right there, not hidden information that instantly transforms whoever finds it, but in a simple truth that, when lived long enough, slowly transforms those who receive it. Loving your neighbor seems simple, until you need to love someone difficult. Forgiving seems simple, until the wound has a name. Not judging hastily seems simple, until someone goes against everything you believe in. Trusting seems simple, until you can't control the outcome. Seeking the kingdom first seems simple, until other priorities start competing for the center of your life. It is at this point that teaching stops being information and begins to become experience. And perhaps this is where Gnosis, understood as lived knowledge and not as a mere collection of esoteric ideas, can serve as a useful image. Knowing the truth spiritually would not be just being able to repeat it. It would be allowing her to get to know us. May it reveal our contradictions. May she reach our fears. Let her question our priorities. That it would change our way of being in the world. There is a detail in this perspective that usually goes unnoticed. If the kingdom grows like a seed, then perhaps we cannot measure its presence just by the number of answers we have. Maybe we need to watch our questions. There are questions that are born from fear. How can I control everything? How can I avoid any suffering? How can I guarantee that I will never make a mistake? But there are questions that arise from maturity. How can I act truthfully in this situation? What is my pride not allowing me to see? Am I listening to this person or just waiting my turn to respond? What does it mean to love without abandoning me? What kind of fruit are my choices bearing? When our questions change, perhaps something has already changed within us, and no one heard it happen. The root made no noise, but it appeared. There is yet another parable that illuminates this mystery. In Matthew 13, Jesus compares the kingdom to treasure hidden in a field. The hidden image returns. That which has enormous value is not necessarily exposed on the surface. It needs to be recognized. In another nearby parable, the kingdom is compared to a pearl of great price. These images speak of discovery, value, and decision. When something is truly recognized as precious, our relationship to other things changes. Not because someone forced us, but because our sense of value has been reorganized. This is inner transformation. Imagine two people faced with the same choice. Externally, the situation is identical, but one of them realizes something that the other doesn't yet. For one, a certain achievement is worth any price. For another, after certain experiences, peace of conscience became more valuable. The decision changes because the value has changed. Perhaps the kingdom will grow in this way too. Not just adding new rules, but reorganizing what we consider important. You start out wanting to be admired. Then you realize the value of being true. It starts with wanting to win every argument. Then you realize the value of preserving a relationship without abandoning the truth. It starts with wanting to control everything. Then you realize the price that this control takes. It begins by seeking God only in extraordinary moments. Then you begin to perceive the sacred in small acts of mercy, gratitude, and presence. None of this necessarily happens in a single instant. Values also mature. And when values change, choices begin to change almost naturally. Perhaps this is why a profound transformation cannot be reduced to external behavior. You can force someone to follow a rule, but you can't force him to love what the rule tries to protect. You can demand silence, but you cannot manufacture peace. It may require words of forgiveness, but it cannot produce interior reconciliation by decree. It can teach concepts about God, but you cannot force someone to desire God. The seed needs to find land. This realization makes spirituality less controlling and more patient. It does not mean absence of responsibility. The farmer still sows, still takes care, still waiting for harvest time, but he respects a process that he does not completely control. Maybe too we need to learn to do this with other people. How many times do we try to accelerate someone's spiritual path? We want people to understand what took us years to understand. We want it to change immediately. We want you to see what we see. And when that doesn't happen, we get frustrated. But perhaps our role is not always to produce change. Sometimes it's just sowing with respect. A conversation, an example, a gesture, a question, a presence. After that, there is a region of the other's consciousness that does not belong to us. This is also humility. You are not the farmer of all souls. You don't need to control the growth of everyone around you. Perhaps part of love is knowing when to speak and when to allow a seed to remain silent. There are people who remember for years a phrase that someone said without imagining its importance. A teacher, a grandmother, a friend, an unknown person. Perhaps whoever uttered the phrase forgot it the next day, but whoever heard it carried that for decades. This is how some seeds travel, and this takes us to a very beautiful dimension of the kingdom. Small is not necessarily insignificant. This is one of the messages of the mustard seed. We need not exaggerate the botanical details of the parable to see its main intention. Jesus contrasts a small beginning with a much greater development. It confronts our obsession with size. We think that only what reaches crowds has value, that only great events change lives, that only extraordinary experiences deserve to be called spiritual. But a conversation can change a decision. One decision can change a family. A forgiveness can stop years of resentment. An attitude of mercy can remain in someone's memory. A small discipline of silence can change the way we respond in moments of tension. A verse can accompany a person throughout an entire phase of life. The little one can carry the future. A seed fits in your hand, not a tree. Maybe some things in your life seem small because you are only looking at their present size, not what they can become. This does not mean that every small event has an extraordinary destiny. We don't need to turn the metaphor into a promise of success. The spirituality of Jesus is not a formula to guarantee wealth, fame, or the absence of difficulties. The growth we are talking about is different. It's true growth in conscience, in compassion, in responsibility, in capacity to love, in freedom in the face of impulses that previously controlled us. And perhaps that is precisely why it is difficult to measure. How to measure the moment when a person stops needing to prove something to everyone? How do you measure the moment when someone finally manages to say, "I was wrong"? How to measure the birth of the courage to ask for forgiveness? How can we measure the transformation of a person who still feels fear, but no longer allows fear to determine all their choices? There is no rule for that, but there are fruits, and the fruits appear in time. Perhaps you are beginning to see why silence is so important to this mystery. Not because God is necessarily hiding anything, but because some realities can only be perceived when we stop demanding that everything manifest itself immediately. There is a difference between silence and secrecy. A secret is something deliberately kept from someone. Silence may simply be the condition of a process that does not yet have words. A child being formed in the womb does not announce each stage. A healing wound does not produce a report every hour. An idea maturing can remain for days without being able to be expressed. A profound decision can be born after long periods of apparent indecision. Don't waste any more time living with this burden. Get the digital book, Censured Gospels, the words of Jesus that were removed, now, and discover how to apply these powerful teachings in your daily life. Attention, stock is limited and running out quickly. Click now and start your journey towards the peace and confidence you deserve. Perhaps the soul also has processes without language, moments when something is being reorganized before we know how to name it. And perhaps it is dangerous to name too soon, because when we put a quick label on an experience, we can stop noticing it. We say, "It means such a thing," and we close the question. But what if we don't know yet? What if we can simply remain mindful? This attitude is very different from believing in any interpretation. She is contemplative. Do not abandon discernment. Don't abandon reason. Don't abandon tradition. It just recognizes that not every experience needs to be immediately reduced to a conclusion. The two ancient spiritual texts often work with symbols precisely because symbols support contemplation. Light, water, bread, vine, door, path, seed. Each of these images can be understood on different levels without losing their core. When Jesus speaks of living water in the Gospel of John, for example, the image points to a reality that satisfies a deeper thirst. When he talks about the bread of life, he uses a daily need to talk about spiritual dependence. When it says, "I am the door," it presents an image of access. When he talks about the vine, he presents communion and permanence. And when he talks about the seed, he presents growth. Perhaps it will be possible to bring these images together in a single movement. Something is received. Something feeds. Something connects. Something opens. Something grows. And then life begins to bear fruit. From this perspective, the kingdom is not an isolated piece of Jesus' message. It cuts across your way of teaching. But we need to return to the most delicate issue. Can we really say that the kingdom of God is within you? Historical and textual care is necessary here. In Luke 17:20-21, when the Pharisees ask when the kingdom of God would come, Jesus responds that it would not come in a way that could simply be observed, adding a Greek expression that can be translated in different ways. Some translations say the kingdom is within you. Others prefer among you or among you. This difference is important. As Jesus was responding to a group of Pharisees, many interpreters consider among you to be a more appropriate translation for the context, indicating the presence of the kingdom in Jesus' own presence and mission. Other spiritual readings placed greater emphasis on the idea of interiority. There is no reason to hide this complexity. In fact, it makes the topic more interesting, because our title can be understood symbolically without pretending that there is only one possible translation. Even though Luke 17 is understood as, "The kingdom is among you," other parables continue to show that the action of the kingdom needs to be received, produce transformation, and bear fruit. That is, the inner dimension need not depend on a single controversial word. It appears in the whole experience. The kingdom among us touches what exists within us. The presence of God transforms relationships, choices, priorities, and consciousness. The outside meets the inside, and the inside returns to the outside in the form of life. Perhaps this movement goes deeper than simply choosing between in and between, because what is truly between us needs to change how we live with each other. And what truly transforms us inside cannot end up closed within ourselves. The seed grows in the earth, but then it breaks the surface. The kingdom does not end at the root. It produces fruit. This is perhaps one of the most important corrections to certain modern interpretations of spirituality. There is a tendency to turn everything into a personal experience: my peace, my energy, my conscience, my awakening, my enlightenment. But Jesus constantly talks about others, from the poor, from the enemy, of forgiveness, of mercy, of reconciliation, of justice, from the service. If the spiritual experience ends with just me, perhaps I have not yet reached the full depth of the message. The tree does not eat its own fruit. They exist beyond it. Maybe this image can teach us something. What grows inside you should, at some point, become shelter, food, presence, or mercy for someone. Not for you to be admired, but because fruit is a natural consequence of a healthy tree. And here we come to a question that may be more important than all the previous ones. How do you know if something is really growing? Maybe you expect to feel something extraordinary, but try observing other things. Do you react the same way you did a year ago? Do the same provocations control you with the same ease? Do you need the approval of others so much? Can you hear criticism without immediately turning the other person into an enemy? Can you recognize when you don't know? Has your compassion increased? Have you become more able to set boundaries without hating? Can you disagree without dehumanizing? Can you remain silent when you previously needed to win the argument? Perhaps these questions reveal more than passing sensations, because true growth changes patterns. Slowly, sometimes almost imperceptibly, until one day you find yourself faced with a situation you've experienced before, and you realize you responded differently. It is at this moment that you may see the first sprout. The situation is similar, but you're not exactly the same. And that can be deeply moving, not because you have become perfect, but because he understands that change is possible. The past does not need to determine your reaction forever. Fear does not need to have the last word. Guilt doesn't have to define your entire identity. Pride can be recognized. Resentment can be worked on. Compassion can be learned. Faith can mature. The way of understanding God can deepen. Maybe the kingdom will grow just like that, not as a spectacular invasion of sensations, but as a new way of being present in life. And when this transformation begins, something curious happens. You begin to look for fewer external signs of spiritual superiority, because you begin to realize that the hardest work isn't discovering secrets about others, it's allowing the truth to reach you. Perhaps this is why the phrase "know thyself," although it comes from a Greek philosophical tradition and is not a phrase from Jesus, has found so much space in different spiritual paths. Self-knowledge can reveal our contradictions. But from a Christian perspective, it does not need to end with ourselves. Knowing our limitations can make room for grace. Knowing our fears can allow us to stop being governed by them. Knowing our motivations can make our choices more honest. And recognizing that we are not the center of everything is perhaps one of the deepest forms of freedom. The image of the monad, used in different philosophical contexts and later present in certain spiritual traditions, also needs to be treated with care. There is no basis for simply asserting that Jesus taught a specific doctrine of the monad in the sense used by later systems. But as a philosophical symbol of unity or original principle, it can serve as a reflection on our search for a source. Humanity has always asked where it comes from. Why does it exist? Where are you going? What exists behind the multiplicity of things? Christians answer these questions through the language of God, creation, Christ, and fellowship. Other traditions used other concepts. Mixing them without distinction creates confusion. Comparing them carefully can produce interesting questions. And perhaps one of those questions is, why do we feel such a need to return to a center? Our lives often become fragmented. We are one person at work, another at home, another when we are alone, another when we want to impress, another when we feel afraid. We carry versions of ourselves adapted to the expectations of each environment, and after a while, we may forget which one is true. Perhaps spiritual growth includes a movement of integration, not in the sense of eliminating all the complexities of personality, but of reducing the distance between what we say we value and what we actually experience. When this distance decreases, coherence emerges, and coherence produces peace in a way that no appearance can. You no longer need to spend so much energy protecting characters. You can admit limits. You can change your mind. You can say, "I don't know." You can ask for help. You can ask for forgiveness. You may recognize that you are tired. You can confess a doubt without believing that all your faith will crumble because of it. This could also be growth. Perhaps one of the deepest roots is precisely the ability to be true before God. No performance, no speeches, no need to impress. Prayer, in this sense, is no longer just a set of beautiful words. It becomes presence, sometimes gratitude, sometimes he asks, sometimes silence, sometimes tears, sometimes no special sensation, and yet permanence. There is something profoundly liberating about realizing that you don't need to fabricate a spiritual experience to prove you have faith. The seed grows while the farmer sleeps. Maybe you don't need to watch every second of your soul. Perhaps you can trust that discipline, attention, prayer, study, community, service, and time are also part of a path whose results cannot always be measured immediately. This is not passivity. It's trust without absolute control. And perhaps few things are as difficult for us as this. We want to control even our growth. We create deadlines. At a certain age, I should be like this. After so many years of faith, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be over it by now. But who set these deadlines? Life does not mature everyone at the same pace. There are areas where you can be deeply mature, and others where you still react from old wounds. This does not mean that there is no responsibility. It means that human beings are complex. A tree can have a strong branch and another that still needs to be taken care of. Perhaps it would be more honest to observe without condemning, recognize without justifying. Work without hating yourself. Sustainable change is rarely born from contempt. It is born from truth accompanied by responsibility and often compassion. Jesus demonstrates this repeatedly in his encounters. He doesn't treat all people the same way. With some, he asks questions. With others, it confronts. With others, welcome. With others, he tells stories. This reveals something about growth. Not all land needs the same care. Maybe what worked for someone else doesn't exactly work for you. A spiritual practice can help someone concentrate and not have the same effect on someone else. A period of silence may be deeply meaningful to someone, while another person may find clarity by talking to someone they trust. We don't need to transform spiritual tools into universal formulas. The center is not the technique. The center is the transformation that leads to a truer life before God and others. And perhaps it is precisely here that many get lost when searching for Gnostic mysteries. Mystery seems more attractive when it promises a secret technique. One word, a code, a ritual, one frequency, an instant key. But the image of Jesus is almost the opposite of that. Seed, earth, time, patience, fruit. Nothing could be less instantaneous. Perhaps the real mystery is not how to escape the process. Maybe it's understanding why God so often seems to work through him. Think again of the farmer. He doesn't open the ground every morning to check if the seed has grown. If you did that, you would probably harm what you are trying to observe. There is wisdom in not constantly interfering. Maybe we do the opposite with ourselves. We analyze every emotion. We measure each experience. We ask every day if we are growing. And this vigilance can turn spirituality into anxiety. Maybe some things just need to be experienced. Do the good that is before you. Ask for forgiveness when necessary. Pray sincerely. Read carefully. Listen. Serve. Rest. Seek help when you need it. Learn. Come back when you make a mistake. And allow time to reveal fruits that you would not be able to produce directly. There is a serenity hidden in this perspective. You don't need to produce a tree today. Maybe you just need to take care of the land. And taking care of the land can mean something very simple. Reduce the noise for a few minutes. Observe a reaction before obeying it. Ask why a particular criticism hurt so much. Read a short passage slowly rather than rushing through many pages. Talk to someone who thinks differently without trying to beat them. Say an honest prayer, even if it's just, God, I don't know. Maybe this seems small, but remember the mustard seed. Small things should not be despised just because they are small. There is another essential element. A seed must die for a certain form of existence for another form to appear. In the Gospel of John, Jesus uses a similar image when talking about the grain of wheat that falls into the earth. In the context of the Gospel, this image is related to the path of Jesus and the meaning of his death. And we should not rip it out of that context simply to transform it into a formula for personal development. But, as a secondary reflection, the image also reminds us that transformation involves leaving something behind. Not all growth is about acquiring. Some growth happens when we let go. A need for approval, an idealized image of ourselves, an old dispute, a guilt that has already been recognized and faced, but that we continue to use as punishment. A certainty that we discovered to be superficial, a relationship with control, a version of God too small for the questions that life has brought us. Maybe some things need to end before others can begin, and endings rarely feel like growth while they're happening. Sometimes they just seem like loss. This is why we need discernment and patience. Not all loss is good. Not every break is necessary. Not all suffering automatically produces growth. But some transformations require goodbyes, and maybe you only recognize this much later, when you look back and realize that what seemed like a void has opened up space, not for something magical, but for a more mature way of living. It's at this point that the silent kingdom starts to stop being just a pretty idea. It becomes a lens, a way to observe your own history. Perhaps some of the most important things that have happened to you started without you realizing it. A friendship, a vocation, a change of perspective, a decision, a question, a reading, a conversation. You didn't hear trumpets. There was not a sign in the sky. Life simply placed a small seed in front of you, and you received it. Then came ordinary days. It's important to say this. Ordinary days. Because perhaps the kingdom grows much more on ordinary days than we imagine. We don't constantly live in extraordinary moments. Most of existence happens between memorable events. We woke up. We work. We ate. We talked. We solve problems. We take care of people. We made a mistake. We tried again. It is on this ground that character is formed, not just during retreats, ceremonies, or intense experiences, but when no one is turning that moment into something special. Patience is formed when there is reason for impatience. Generosity is formed when sharing costs something. Forgiveness is formed in the face of the memory of the wound. The truth is formed when lying would be convenient. Humility is formed when we could use our position to put someone down. The kingdom, if it is growing, finds these places. Maybe that's why Jesus talked so much about everyday life. Breads, fish, coins, fields, seeds, weddings, workers, parents and children, shepherds and sheep, doors, lamps. He found depth in the ordinary. Perhaps we have overcomplicated what begins with attention. We want to find God just above life. Jesus often points to God through his own life. A seed. Look at her. There is an entire theology of time there. You plant something today whose fruit belongs to the future. This requires hope. Every seed is a small declaration of confidence in tomorrow. Perhaps living the kingdom also means planting things whose results you may not see immediately. Teach a child, take care of someone, break a cycle of aggression, choose honesty, build trust, start again. None of these acts guarantee perfect results, but they can all be seeds. And some seeds will produce fruit in places you will never be able to track. This realization lessens our need to control the impact of everything. You do what you believe to be true and good, and allows life to continue. Perhaps this is what the farmer in the parable teaches us. He sows, but it does not become the seed. It does not attempt to do the work that belongs to the earth. There is a line between responsibility and control. Many of our anxieties are born when we cross this border. Responsibility asks, what can I do? Control asks, how can I guarantee the result? We can't always. You can love someone without guaranteeing that you will be loved. You can tell the truth without guaranteeing that you will be understood. You can ask for forgiveness without guaranteeing reconciliation. You can offer an opportunity without guaranteeing that it will be accepted. You can teach without guaranteeing that someone will learn. You can sow, but it cannot command all stations. Perhaps faith begins precisely where the illusion of control ends. Not a passive faith, but a faith that acts and then lets go, who works and rests, that sows and sleeps, night and day. The seed grows, and the man doesn't know exactly how. Perhaps this is one of the most humble phrases in the parables. Don't know how. We live in a time where it seems difficult to say that. I don't know. We want explanations for everything, and when they don't exist, sometimes we invent them. In spirituality, this can be especially dangerous. A coincidence happens and someone immediately declares they know its absolute meaning. A dream occurs and someone claims to know exactly what God is saying. A bodily sensation appears and is quickly transformed into a supernatural sign. But maturity also means knowing how to say, I don't know. It could mean several things. I need to watch. There is no consensus. That's an interpretation, not a fact. Perhaps the mystery does not require us to abandon reason. Perhaps it requires a humble reason, able to recognize limits, able to contemplate without inventing certainties, able to keep a question open. This makes our approach to Gnosis much more responsible. Gnostic texts can be studied as important religious and spiritual documents to understand the diversity of the first centuries. We can explore your images, compare your ideas with the canonical Gospels,